1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the question we have to ask is, if everything was so good in status quo, then why are these healthcare and educational institutions falling below the standard? The standard being everyone having a fair and good way to be able to access it. Meaning, the modality in which this debate operates is the modality in which status quo is operating, of which we never really heard any clear defense for. Side opposition needs to give us a very clear accounting in terms of why status quo works and why these things should be granted separate access and how the state should not intervene. We empathize and we understand that in instances where it's below that standard, it could be the state's fault, but it also could be the private corporation's fault. Meaning, is it the corporations that we elected into government who want to run our country? No, it's these politicians. Meaning, it's actually an affront to democracy to actually allow these individuals to get away and wash their hands clean and use these private corporations as a scapegoat. Even if these private corporations do it to the best of their ability and it's efficient in some developing countries, we don't think that's truly representative because of what my partner talked to you about, of which there are some people who are most vulnerable, who are pushed to the margins. What is my extension? My extension is that I'm going to mech out and talk about the transitionary period and the interplay of the government and the state and all other actors, meaning private actors, other institutions, and people. And I'm going to particularly explain what unique change we get on our side and why their comparative is bad. Responses will be integrated. The first thing I have to say is on this symmetric idea that the previous speaker gave that political dynasties and oligarchs are corrupt, and therefore, if you give them the reins, they're going to do a particularly bad job. The first thing I have to answer or say is that it's not necessarily that these people are bad because on both sides, human greed will still be there. It's just that we do not have any call to action in order for them to be held accountable. Meaning, the 500 million peso confidential funds of VP or former VP Sara Duterte are just there. And people, particularly those in the middle and upper echelons of society, just have no fucking proximate access to any of that because they don't care. Because they have the comfort of their gated villages, their nice luxury condos, their private schools, and private healthcare systems. Meaning, we think that the point in which they become reliant on these state institutions is now the incentive structure for them to remove their rose-colored and tinted glasses to be able to understand the reality of what's happening and see that yung kapwa-tao or the average person is suffering. Because the average individual has private insurance, private healthcare, private school. There's no incentive for them to be able to push the state to be able to make it better at a point in which there is no check and balance because they can say, my life is fine and daddy, oh, look at the poor, they are suffering. Meaning, the point in which the children of these particular politicians are now in the same school as anybody else or now having to go and get their annual healthcare checkup and treatment in the same institution is the point in which we pressure them to actually be able to make it better and start donating. The intuition pump I have here is the model of Ivy League and private corporations, wherein a lot of their stakeholder and donor base does come from these rich families, who I understand could be oligarchs, but in order for them not to be embarrassed because they also own shares in this, and also for their next of kin to be able to have good access, we want them to be able to double down on their investment. Because the problem my partner talked about is this asymmetric access to opportunity to these individuals, which we think is a disgrace. The next idea here is a question. Why is this going to be particularly good, and what exactly is going to happen? It's very simple. Both the state and private corporations want to be able to make money. Meaning, the point in which private corporations are beholden to the state and their greed is kept in check, they balance each other out wherein we create two particular modalities. on-site government, where all of these institutions who can be corrupt, etc., are under the state, and now the state has every incentive to get their shit together. Why? Because people are watching. And as they say, these politicians also want to be able to be in power. Meaning, no shit, if they don't give a good school or good healthcare, the massa, everyone's gonna get pissed. And also, the oligarchs and rich people who used to be able to be separate in their ivory tower, but are now in the same pool we swim in order to face those harms. The point in which we feel pain is the point in which people are likely to use the levers of the system to be able to stick it at them. What are these levers? The political levers, such as not voting them into power, impeaching them, like what we saw with the vice president, having referenda, and going out in the streets to be able to clamor and say, this politician has confidential funds, they're not spending it on something that affects us all, we want their head. That is as opposed to in status quo, wherein the people who have the capacity and power to be able to push, the rich elites, again, are not proximate to this idea because they can just stay secluded and say, my life is fine and dandy, but the reality outside the comfort of their four walls is far from it. That's the political lever. What other levers do they have? Economic levers, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to start selling shares of those companies. They're going to start bad-mouthing those companies who have become complicit in the worst case of the corporations. And now we have a more proximate area to be able to attack them because it's not just an attack against the poor, which happens in status quo but no one cares, but now it becomes an attack against the rich. The point in which on both sides you threaten capitalism and their wallets, which we think motivate both sides, in and of itself is an incentive structure for them to be able to take it seriously and make it better. Make no mistake, my partner and I understand there's going to be a transitionary period. We think it's fair to say that it won't be like a tectonic shift and boom, all the bad stuff happen. This can be done gradually. This debate more is about the principle of democracy, of which is the core of my extension, to be able to explain why uniquely, because of what my partner explained about rights, is able to keep that system in check as opposed to letting it explode and go to the wayside. What have we told you about? We gave you a very clear comparative in terms of why status quo is uniquely problematic and how on the comparative, under the singular modality of the state, through them being able to control it, you get better, cheaper, and more proliferated access. We are very proud to stand on side proposition.